Hey guys, welcome to today's video where I'll be trying the 100 Heads Challenge. If you don't know, the 100 Heads Challenge is where you draw 100 portraits in 10 days. I wanted to try this challenge to improve my portraits and fill my sketchbook. In this video, I'll talk about my process and how I felt about the challenge, and then I'll give my tips for completing the challenge for anyone that wants to try it also. So starting with day one, I wanted to start with a simple medium, so I used a Sharpie pen. I tried cross-hatching, which was kind of a new technique for me since I usually work in color, but I enjoyed it a lot. The reason I started the challenge with a simple medium was just to start small and get used to drawing 10 heads in one day with something that I knew wouldn't take too long so that I wouldn't lose motivation to continue the challenge already just after day one. The full spread of Sharpie portraits still took at least an hour, maybe 2 hours, so it still took a lot of time, but that was mostly the time it took to sketch the portraits in pencil first, and the cross-hatching was nice and quick, so I appreciated that. And I'll also include one tip for completing the challenge for every day. So my first tip after day one would have to be have a goal when you start this challenge. The goal can be simple. Maybe you just want to improve your portraits. Maybe you want to try different mediums. Maybe you just want to get better at painting guys because they're hard. Whatever it is, just keep a goal in mind to help yourself get through the challenge and assess whether you completed your goal at the end of the challenge. My goals were to improve my portraits and work with many different mediums, some of which I've never done portraits with, such as the Sharpie pens. And this forced me to get out of my comfort zone and try methods I never use, like cross-hatching. So if you plan on trying the 100 Heads Challenge, get a goal so that you can look back at your work when you finish the challenge and feel proud that you improved on something. So that was day one, and now we are on to day two. I was excited for day two because I love working in color, and this day was for colored pencil portraits. I tried to sketch some of the portraits the day before so that I could just jump right into working with color and fully rendering the portraits because I knew that colored pencil would take me forever to do. With colored pencil, there's a lot of blending in order to get accurate skin tones and a smooth texture, so that takes a while. But like I said, I love working in color, and colored pencils are one of my favorite mediums, so overall I enjoyed the second day a lot. I also liked a lot of the portraits that I worked on this day because there was a lot of variety, and that brings me perfectly into my tip for day two, which is use a lot of different references. I tried to include different emotions, ages, old people, kids, different facial features, ethnicities, men and women, and this keeps the portraits interesting, new and exciting, and it helps you to develop new skills while drawing something that you may have never drawn before. I had never drawn wrinkles before this challenge, but I used a lot of different references that pushed me out of my comfort zone of what I would normally create, and it was fun having to draw new things. By the time I got to this portrait, I was starting to get a little impatient, but I just persevered through because I only had a few more to complete before I could just relax and have another spread of portraits done. And as you can see, I used a reference of an older man here, which was kind of fun to draw. It was especially satisfying when I finished most of the portrait and I could just add those last few wrinkles and details to really add to the portrait. I don't know exactly how long day two took me to complete, but I would have to guess somewhere around 5 hours. So it took a while to do each portrait because with colored pencil, you have to layer so much to build good colors. So by the end of this day, I was definitely a little drained, but I was so relieved when it was over, and I was really happy with the final spread. And now we are on to day three. The medium I used for day three was acrylic paint, which is my favorite medium of choice, but it was another pretty ambitious medium to use for a challenge where you're supposed to efficiently draw 10 portraits in one day, every day for 10 days. But variety is the spice of life. So the first acrylic portrait I did, I wasn't a big fan of how it turned out, and I think the problem was that I didn't mix my skin tones well, so it came out a little blotchy, I guess. But I tried to mix different tones for the next portrait, and I liked how it came out a little better. I will admit I was super lazy with the paint mixing, so I used a lot of the same few skin tones that I already mixed for multiple different portraits, and that's why they all will have like a similar color palette. But I just didn't have it in me to mix a range of different skin tones for each individual portrait when it was already taking a while to paint each of them, and mixing is my least favorite part of the painting process, to be honest. Anyway, some of the portraits I was really happy with, and others were just okay, but I was content with how they looked considering I had to paint 10 different heads. I wasn't expecting them all to be perfect. And my tip for day 3 is to use a variety of different mediums for different spreads like I'm doing here. I tried to change up every single day because that's what kept me motivated to complete each day, but you don't have to use 10 different mediums. I would definitely recommend, though, not doing the same medium 2 days in a row because you'll probably get bored of it and bored of the challenge in general. Switching up the medium you use keeps things interesting and makes you have to change your approach to portraits, which is good when you have 100 of them. The next portrait that I did, which you can see me doing here, was probably my favorite from the whole spread. I think it had the best blending out of all the portraits on the whole spread, and I also liked the reference picture that I used, so I enjoyed painting this one. I also tried to be more loose, like I had a kind of an underpainting, so I enjoyed the process here. And that is all for day 3. Now we are moving right along to day 4, which I used colored pencil again, but this time I wanted to try monochrome colorful portraits. I wanted really bright color for this spread, and I also thought it would be simpler and take a lot less time to do the monochromatic portraits because I wouldn't need smooth blending or layering to get the colors more accurate and perfect. I was really excited for day 4, and I enjoyed coloring these portraits because they didn't take too long and they came out super pretty together because of all the different colors. So my tip for day 4 would definitely be to alternate each day between the harder and longer mediums and the shorter and easier mediums. When you complete a day of portraits where you just spent 5 or more hours using acrylic paint or something like that, you might want to use a quicker medium the next day, like graphite or pen or anything that you know won't take you long so that you can stay motivated for the next day. Chances are you won't want to spend hours on 2 pages back-to-back days, so balance out your mediums to stay motivated. That's what I did with this spread. I had just spent the last 2 days using colored pencils and acrylic paint, so I knew that I would want something quick and easy that looks good without too much detail. So day 4 was definitely one of my favorite days to complete because it was just nice, refreshing, and a quick day of drawing, and the spread came out looking bright and colorful, which I always love. I tried to switch out and use a different color for every single portrait, but there's only so many colors to choose from, so I did end up repeating a couple of the colors, like the purples and blues, but I at least tried to use different shades of those colors. Here you can see that I started with a red portrait, I used some darker blue, you'll see that I used some green, and then I ended up using yellow, orange, purple, and pretty much any other shade or color I could think of to avoid repeating the same colors. So that is how day 4 went. I really enjoyed it, and now we can move right along to day 5. We made it to day 5. We're halfway through the challenge now. So for day 5, I kept it simple with the most basic art tool, just a pencil. I wanted to try graphite portraits because I never really draw with just graphite since I'm usually working with color. I also wanted to use a simple medium again because day 4 went so well and I was enjoying the quicker mediums. I used a lot of cool and interesting references for day 5. The creator of the 100 Heads Challenge created his own Pinterest board for the challenge with references in it, and it has a lot of sculpture portraits with some really interesting expressions, so I wanted to try doing all of the sculptures on the same spread for day 5. For most of the challenge, I used my own references that I found on Pinterest because I had specific expressions and goals that I wanted to work on, but the sculptures from the original Pinterest board were really different from all of the other references that I used. A lot of the sculptures had cool beards and features, so I enjoyed drawing these sculpture portraits because they had a lot of cool things going on that I never usually draw. Anyway, my tip for day 5 is to plan out each day before it happens. For me, this meant sketching the next day's heads the night before because I knew that if I had to sketch 10 portraits first and then color them in or paint them the same day, I would probably get bored and want to give up on the day. So make sure that you have all of your references ready way before the challenge and that you sketch your portraits ahead of time so that you can stay motivated. Staying motivated, I feel, is the key to completing this challenge. The cool thing about drawing references that someone else picked out, especially if they're references that you probably wouldn't have chosen on your own, is that it forces you to try something new and realize what you usually draw. I realized that I usually pick the same kinds of references that don't have too much facial expression and have like a certain face angle because some of these were challenges to draw, and that's why I wanted to try out this challenge to improve my sketching and portraits because I know that if you're drawing 100 portraits in only 10 days, it forces you to use a lot of variety and get used to drawing a lot of different things that you probably never even realized you haven't drawn before. So that was day 5. I was really happy with how the spread turned out, and now we are on to day 6, where I'll be using red and blue ink from pens. So day 6, I was feeling kind of lazy and I didn't want to sketch before starting the ink drawings. So I thought it would be a good chance to try drawing without a sketch first and without an eraser. It was kind of scary because I couldn't erase any mistakes. I just had to keep going and become more confident in my lines. Because I wasn't sketching first in pencil, some of the portraits did come out looking wonky in my opinion, like the first one I did. But this challenge is for experimentation and improvement after all, so I wanted to try this method. I ended up liking the blue portraits a lot more than the red ones, which makes sense because I had more time to develop line confidence and draw without a sketch, and blue is also my favorite color, so that might have a little something to do with it. But the cool thing is that the spread still overall looks pretty good because I just love blue and red together. With the pens, I used cross-hatching again, and I learned that sometimes less is more with the lines. Less lines that have more movement look a lot better than a drawing crammed with cross-hatching everywhere. So anyway, my tip for day 6 is to work small. Make sure the heads are small so that you're not painting 10 fully rendered, full-page portraits every single day because that would just be too much and it would probably cause burnout. I usually did 5 portraits on one page, which you can see here, but you can include less or more on each page depending on the size of your sketchbook and the size of the portraits you're drawing. But I definitely recommend drawing smaller portraits so that you can work through them quickly and without having to include too much detail and just getting bored and tired of drawing so much every single day. Okay, now we are moving on to day 7. By now, I was nearing the end of the challenge and I was feeling a little ready for it to be over after drawing 60 portraits, but I was excited to do day 7 because I was using black marker and I was trying a technique that I just recently got into, which is stippling. It's a time-consuming method, so I definitely wanted to work small this day and I crammed all 10 heads onto one page and sketched them all out and was ready to begin. I think stippling always looks really cool and detailed, so I was happy to try it out. Thankfully, the marker I used was dual tip, so when I was stippling for the details and shading, I used the fine tip to do all those little dots, but when I had parts that were really dark and solid, like the hair and the eyes, I used the large tip so that I could just block in the color without having to cram a million little dots to get a solid black. And I feel like the contrast of all the little dots and the solid black hair and eyebrows and eyes created a much more interesting page of drawings. I feel like if everything was done with stippling, I feel like the whole page would have just blended into each other. And my tip for day 7, which is my final tip for this challenge, is don't push yourself past the point of no return. I know this is supposed to be a 10-day challenge, and ideally we all want to complete it immediately, but if you can feel yourself getting burnt out every single day, don't force yourself to take only the 10 days. Honest disclaimer, I took more than 10 days to complete this challenge because sometimes I just needed a break from drawing portraits. But my other piece of advice would be don't wait too long to complete the challenge because you might lose all motivation and never return. But if it takes a few more days to draw 100 portraits, that's normal and it's okay. Just keep your goals in mind and focus on completing those. We made it to day 8. Day 8 is very exciting because I just got new Ohuhu markers for the first time. You can see my unboxing and review of them in my last video. This was my first time ever drawing portraits with these markers, so I was really excited and a little nervous because I wasn't sure what to expect. Thankfully, there's a lot of variety in the marker pack that I bought, so there was so many different skin tones to choose from when drawing these portraits. I also really enjoyed this spread because there were a lot of cool portraits that I enjoyed drawing. The first portrait that you see me drawing right here had a really interesting smiling expression, and expression was one of the things that I wanted to work on when I was drawing these portraits. I also really love this portrait that I'm drawing right here. It was one of my favorite portraits in the whole 100 Heads challenge, so this spread was going really good for me. Drawing the freckles for this portrait was really satisfying because I love getting to add on little details like wrinkles and freckles after completing the hard parts of a portrait like blending and making everything else look good. So this spread was time consuming because I was trying to figure out how to work with markers, but I was also having a lot of fun with experimenting with them and finding a new colorful medium to use. I'll definitely be using markers more. I can't believe I never drew with markers before because I enjoyed drawing this spread the most out of all of the other spreads so far. So this challenge was a really great way for me to practice using the markers and realize how fun they are to use. The next portrait that I'll draw in a few seconds had an older lady in it with wrinkles and details that I never really draw, and it was really interesting trying to convey that detail with markers. I also drew a model with vitiligo, which was really interesting to draw with the markers because there's limited blending with them. But overall, I just really enjoyed trying out these markers on different portraits, and I like the portrait references that I used for this day a lot, so it was a very enjoyable day for the challenge for me. Definitely in my top 3 favorite spreads for the challenge. And it couldn't have come at a better time because day 8 is well into the challenge. You know, motivation can be running low, but this was a great way for me to get excited about the challenge again. I was really happy the whole time I was completing this spread, and I was even excited to continue on the next day, which I won't spoil what I did, but it's kind of similar, so I was excited for it. So that was day 8, and now we are on to day 9, and as you can see, I enjoyed the marker portraits so much the day before that I continued more marker portraits on day 9, but this time I used monochromatic portraits similar to what I did for the colored pencil days. The monochromatic portraits were really fun again because they were simple and didn't take too much time, and there's also a lot of color variety with the markers, so I was able to get a lot of different colors, and the portraits ended up looking super colorful and different from each other, which I liked. Another difference between this monochromatic spread and the first monochromatic spread I did with the colored pencils is that the markers have a lot of different shades for each color, so I was able to use darker, lighter, purples, blues, whatever for each portrait so that there could be more variety of color in each monochromatic portrait, whereas with the colored pencils I only used one colored pencil with one color for each portrait. I ended up putting colorful boxes around every single portrait, and the result was a very colorful spread that I was super happy with. Now, day 10 was a challenge for me. I was running out of motivation and mediums for this day. My initial goal was to do watercolor portraits, but this was way too ambitious, especially for me, because watercolor takes a lot of time and patience, and I am super impatient. I'm used to working with acrylic paint that dries like instantly, so waiting for watercolor to dry for 10 different portraits was just not gonna happen. So then I finished the first watercolor portrait with colored pencil, but still wasn't a fan of that. Next, I moved on to oil pastels because that was another medium that I wanted to try for this challenge but hadn't yet, and I wasn't loving the look of the oil pastel portraits either. So I did 4 oil pastel portraits and made my final pivot of the day and just ended up using Sharpie pen again with some loose hatching, and I added some black boxes around each of the 5 last portraits to give them something cool and finalize the spread, and that was basically it for the day. Here's a flip through of all of the finished portraits. Thank you so much for coming along on this journey with me of painting 100 heads in a little more than 10 days. If you enjoyed this process, please give this video a like, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!